Hello everyone, welcome to another video on the channel, welcome to another Gran Turismo 7 opinion piece, and in this one I'm going to discuss why I think Gran Turismo 7 is so aggressive. By aggressive I mean the driving standards, why are drivers so willing to put everything on the line on lap 1, so willing to try and overtake on every single corner, defend to within the inch of their lives, you know, go for a desperate move on the last corner to get a P9 instead of a P10. Something has definitely changed in the game, in my opinion, over the last 6 or 7 months. I'd never experienced this level of aggression in Gran Turismo Sport or even early Gran Turismo 7. And as I said, I think there is some reasons as to why that is the case. This video isn't a call out on other drivers either. I would firmly put myself in the camp as a driver who over the last wee while has become far more aggressive on track, particularly when it comes to being overtaken. On more occasions than I'm happy to admit, I just have a hard time accepting that a driver has a right to go for a move on me. And yeah, I sometimes just don't like the driver that I've become in the last few months in certain circumstances. So the point of this video is to explore the reasons as to why I think the game has gone down the road it has in terms of driving standards and aggressiveness. And as always with these opinion pieces, the point of the video is to promote some discussion. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'd love to hear what you think of the video and the points that I'm going to make in the comment section below. So without further ado, let's get on with the first reason why I think Gran Turismo 7 has become so aggressive on track, and that is overall competitiveness. There's no doubt in my mind that Gran Turismo 7 is now more competitive on track in terms of ability than it ever has been in the past. You only have to take a look at the leaderboards to get a little bit of a reflection of this. This week's Daily Race C, at the time of making this video, we're sitting at 333rd in the world with a 127.4, a fraction over 1 second off the world's fastest time. But I think more interestingly than that, if you then go to look at how many drivers are within 1 second of my lap time, you have to go all the way up into the 3,500 range to find that driver. And it just goes to show just how many drivers are within that kind of margin of each other, just how close so many drivers are to each other in terms of ability. And you see it reflected on track as well. Sometimes I'll go into a Daily Race C, 4 tenths off pole position, starting in P12. Other cases I'll be sort of maybe fighting for a P10 towards the end of a race, but I'm only 8 seconds off the lead. And I just don't remember that kind of circumstance arising quite as much in early Gran Turismo 7 and in Gran Turismo Sport. So I do think that Gran Turismo 7 is just incredibly competitive with the number of drivers that are very closely matched to each other. And of course, as things get more competitive, you can almost expect the aggression levels on track to rise a little bit. And what are we fighting for at the end of the day when it comes to a race? It's that all important driver rating, because driver rating is what we take into the GTWS events, the Gran Turismo World Series. So the higher your DR is, your driver rating, the higher the split you're going to get into when it comes to the most competitive races, or the races where you get to show off a little bit, and that is these GTWS races. Whilst only a very few drivers are ever going to qualify for the World Tour, I think it is important to a lot of drivers out there to show up as best as possible on their friends leaderboard or that domestic leaderboard. So again, because you can only kind of really garner that DR from the daily races, drivers tend to find themselves maybe getting a little bit more aggressive just to try and protect that DR so they can maintain in the highest splits as they possibly can for the GTWS. So almost like a perfect storm in some ways, and I think it does lead to drivers being a little bit more aggressive on track. Next up, let's talk about the Midfield Madness and the way that this kind of part of the track or part of the racing can have an influence on other drivers. So what do I mean by the Midfield Madness? Well, very often in a race, maybe the first 3-4 drivers will have disappeared off down the road. A few drivers have had some accidents and spun off towards the back, and a lot of the racing will come down to the midfield pack. You maybe have 6 to 10 drivers, all very close to each other, all very close in ability, circulating in a very small patch of track. And very often, the way to survive the Midfield Madness is to be very aggressive. Be a little bit elbowsy, be a little bit disrespectful to your opponents, poke a nose in when it's not really wanted, and you know, you do have to have a certain mentality almost to survive the Midfield Madness. Not every driver's got it. I would put myself firmly in the camp as a driver who doesn't really have the kind of attributes to survive the Midfield Madness. I don't know how many times I end up getting shuffled towards the back as I'm just kind of unceremoniously nudged out the way by more aggressive drivers trying to make their way to the front to the midfield. And very often it is the drivers that are aggressive that are successful in these situations. So I think if other drivers are watching this going on, they're going to kind of be influenced by that. They're going to see that maybe that's the way to do it. Then you end up just with more drivers being a little bit more aggressive in the midfield, and it almost becomes a snowball effect that's impossible to stop. So yeah, the madness of the midfield is definitely something that has led to more aggressive driving as the tempers start to flare and the elbows start to come out. Next, we're going to take a look at something that I like to call the 2 temps syndrome. So by that I mean a driver will be within 2 temps of the car in front, and regardless of the corner that they're approaching, regardless of maybe the other cars around, regardless of how much time it might potentially cost to go for an overtake, they're going for the move. They don't care about any of that. If they're within 2 temps of the driver in front, the overtake is on. And very often, this just leads to the driver in front either getting T-boned by the car trying to go for the overtake because they're not really expecting it because they're so far behind, or it becomes a very clumsy nose poke push to pass. And as soon as that starts to happen, then tempers will start to fray, elbows will start to come out, and the aggression levels on the track will start to rise. So yeah, I don't understand really where this notion has came from, that all of a sudden you can now outbrake the same car and a driver of very similar ability to you. You can outbrake them by 2 car lengths into every single corner on the track. I'm not sure why drivers are so desperate to overtake sometimes. Of course, we all love to make an overtake, but overtaking's an art form. It's not easy. You don't see a whole lot of it in real life for that very reason, because overtaking a driver of similar ability to you is difficult. Often the circumstances have to arise to make that overtake more possible. But yeah, there's definitely a kind of issue with drivers going for moves that are not really on. Very often I'll see a driver maybe of A-rated who's kind of came into the top split lobbies if they're a little bit weak, and you'll see them defending fresh air. So you just know that that's a driver that's been dived a lot, they've been overtaken a lot down the inside by drivers from miles behind, and they kind of, I'm like, what are they defending for? You know, there was no way I was going to go for that move. But the problem is, a lot of drivers in the game probably would go for that move, and they feel the need to defend the inside of every corner. It's a problem in the higher splits, but I reckon it's probably an even bigger problem the lower you go down the splits. But yeah, I call it the 2 temps syndrome. It leads to very aggressive driving on the track. It is a very aggressive manoeuvre in the end, but because it very often just ends up being very clumsy, it leads to further aggression from other drivers as well. So yeah, 2 temps syndrome, it's a bit of a problem. One last thing I do want to mention before we move on to some kind of conclusion is that another little problem that can lead to aggressive driving is the aliens starting from the back. So the aliens are the fastest drivers in the game, the sort of drivers that are fast enough for top split, GTWS, or to make it to World Tour events. In often case, they'll have a second account, they'll start at the back of the grid in a daily race, they won't set a qualifying time, and they'll try and make their way up towards the front and last the first challenge if you like. Now the issue sometimes here is that there can be 2 or 3 of them, 3, 4 of them, and they're all trying to compete against each other, and sometimes the manner in which they make their way through the pack can be a little bit suspect, to say the least. Not all of them. Some of the aliens out there do drive very sensibly amongst the slower drivers and make their way to the front by only really overtaking when it's on, but there is a number of them who, as far as I'm concerned, certainly in my opinion, drive in a very disrespectful manner. They go for silly moves, they poke noses in, but it's not really welcoming. Often case they can lead to actually ruining your race a little bit. They've got the residual speed to make these silly moves, lose a second and a half, and then just drive off into the distance. Whereas a driver like myself, or somebody of my kind of ability, you know, I can't afford to lose 2 seconds because you couldn't wait for one corner to go for the overtake. And it can kind of then lead to me getting into tussles and battles with other drivers that I wouldn't normally be involved with, or maybe wouldn't have been had you maybe just went for the overtake at a different time. So yeah, I do feel that can lead to some of the players being aggressive with each other, or certainly with the aliens when they're driving from the back. And of course you've got that influential manner as well, that influential element if you like, where, you know, these names are recognisable, the normal drivers see the way they're driving, the moves that they're going for, and they sort of think, well, that must be the successful way to do it, so they kind of start maybe copying that kind of driving as well, and going for that kind of style of driving without maybe necessarily having the talent. So I don't want to go on too much about this one. I don't think it's as big a problem as some of the other things that I've mentioned in terms of leading to aggressive driving, but I do think there is an element, and it was definitely worth mentioning. But that's the things that I believe that are leading to the aggressive driving in Gran Turismo 7 at the moment. The question is there an actual solution to try and calm people down, or are things just going to get worse? Well, in my opinion, things are only going to get worse. At the moment, there is no real deterrent for aggressive driving. Gran Turismo and PD have tried a number of different penalty systems over the years, none of which have really worked out particularly successful. If the penalty system gets too harsh, the drivers sort of turn against it because they're fed up picking up what they deem to be silly penalties. We have had penalty systems in the past where if you tap the car in the back, you got a 1 second penalty. Personally, I quite liked that because it did mean that people had to be more careful into braking zones and in certain circumstances where there was a lot of cars around them, but there definitely was a backlash to that. We also had PD bringing in damage to the daily races as well. At one point it was very, very sensitive, so the slightest little tap of another car or a barrier would lead to damage on your car, albeit it was temporary, so it would disappear after around about 30 seconds. But again, there was a little bit of a backlash to that from some of the community as well, to the extent where they kind of toned down the sensitivity of the damage. You still do get damage, but it does have to be a fair clunk with another car for that damage to be picked up. We do still have a penalty system, but again, it's really only for a blatant ramming of another car off the track or spinning them around. You'll see somebody picking up a penalty, which just means that all the minor contacts and bumps and grinding and door banging, you get away with it for free. There's no damage, there's no penalty, so it just allows the aggressive driving to flourish. For me personally, I don't see things improving anytime soon. I think the kind of aggressive nature of the driving is here to stay, and to be honest with you, I probably wouldn't even say it's just a Gran Turismo problem. I think if you were to go and speak to people who play ACC on LFM or iRacing, you'd probably get sort of similar kind of conversations from the drivers there, whereas it's just getting more and more aggressive. As things get more competitive, as more people come into sim racing, as you get more drivers of similar ability on the racetrack at the same time, then naturally things do tend to get a little bit more aggressive as people try to get an edge one way or the other. So I do think it's just probably a sim racing problem rather than a Gran Turismo problem. So as I said, I think it's here to stay, and you're going to maybe have to adapt to that style of driving if you want to remain competitive. So that's pretty much it in conclusion. Now I do want to stress, by the way, that I still have a huge amount of fun playing Gran Turismo 7. I have a huge amount of clean races and good racing. It does get a little bit messy sometimes, there's no two doubts about that. I sometimes make things a little bit worse for myself by starting at the back, so maybe I'm even part of the problem at times. But I do think when I come through from the back that I try to be quite respectful with the drivers that are a little bit slower than me. I don't necessarily have the residual speed the majority of the time to make that much progress, but I do think that I try to drive respectfully when I put myself at the back of the grid. But yeah, let me know what you think in the comments about this. Give me your opinions, I'd love to hear it. That's the whole point of these videos, is to try and promote a little bit of conversation about some of the things I'm thinking about in Gran Turismo. Be as critical as you like, as long as it's constructive. Disagree with me all you want, I don't mind at all. I'm happy to have a conversation. But yeah, let me hear your ideas, let me hear your thoughts, let me hear your possible solutions. I love to hear it. I love the comments on these opinion piece videos. But until then, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye now.